Stepfather Kwabena Kofi's company is facing bankruptcy. In order to save everything, Kwabena secretly planned to give Amina Adebayo to a poor old man in his 50s in exchange for an investment. In Kwabena's view, the old man is the only lifeline that can save him from his financial difficulties. In this regard, the stepfather's daughter Zuri Kofi even said to Amina, "The old man is rich. When he dies, all his property will belong to you. Go and enjoy your life." However, when Amina first met the so-called old man, all her expectations were completely shattered. The man in front of her was dressed simply and had a calm expression, but he had a stunningly handsome face. He was totally different from the image of an old man that Amina had imagined, and even gave her an inexplicable sense of familiarity. When Amina lowered her head and looked him in the eye, her heart skipped a beat. He was actually her biological father, Oluwaseun Adebayo. After her parents divorced, Amina's father Oluwaseun left home, and her mother Fatima Dlamini chose to remarry and marry the wealthy Kwabena Kofi, her stepfather. However, within 2 years, Fatima died of illness. When she was dying, what Fatima was most concerned about was Amina's future. Fatima held Kwabena's hand tightly and begged, "Please take good care of Amina. Don't let her suffer. Don't let her go to that irresponsible biological father." Although Amina was already a college student and able to take care of herself, she did not object in order to reassure her mother. Kwabena burst into tears and agreed to Fatima's request. However, soon after Fatima's death, Kwabena's attitude began to become strange. Late one night, Kwabena came home drunk, grabbed Amina's hand, and wouldn't let go, whispering, "You look more and more like your mother. Honey, are you here to see me?" This scene happened to be seen by Zuri, who had just come home from a nightclub. She sneered and said sarcastically, "What? Are you going to be my new stepmother?" Amina felt sick and responded impatiently, "Stop talking nonsense. Come and help me take Uncle back to rest." Zuri shook her head and waved her hands. "Isn't it enough to have you here? Otherwise, why would we keep you here?" Zuri never really accepted Amina and Fatima. Even when Fatima was still alive, Zuri and Amina had always been in conflict, hostile to each other, and even fought at every turn. At this time, Kwabena suddenly turned to Amina and confessed affectionately, "Wife, as long as you are willing to come back, I am willing to give up all my property. What use is that money to me? I will leave it all to you. Are you willing to come back?" Amina froze, her face filled with shock. At this moment, Zuri pointed at Amina excitedly and shouted angrily, "Amina Adebayo, no wonder you stayed in my house. It turns out you are after my family's property. You are such a heartless bastard." Zuri cursed harshly. The next day, school was closed and Amina was not supposed to go home. However, that night, when she went downstairs to get some water, she happened to pass by Zuri's room and heard her conversation with her stepfather. The door was not closed tightly, and Amina heard it clearly. Zuri asked doubtfully, "Can the methods you mentioned really make Amina marry that old man?" Kwabena answered affirmatively, "It works. Amina is just like her mother. She is soft-hearted. After hearing my passionate confession, she will definitely agree to me." Zuri sneered, "Dad, your acting tonight was amazing. It was so disgusting. If that damn woman heard it, she would be so moved that she would come back to life." Kwabena looked proud. "Fortunately, she died in my hands. If she hadn't refused to obey, I wouldn't have married her. If she hadn't died, all this wouldn't have fallen on me." Zuri continued to mock, "You deserve it. She didn't leave you the company, but left the property to that bitch. Didn't I tear up her will in the end? All the money is mine." Kwabena warned seriously, "You can't tell Amina about this. She doesn't know yet." Zuri responded nonchalantly, "What does it matter if I know? She's just going to marry that old man soon, isn't she? She'll never be able to turn things around in her life." Kwabena sighed. "It's a pity for Amina. She is so beautiful. If the company wasn't in deficit, she would have to marry him to pay off the debt. It's not like I couldn't marry her and enjoy a good life." Zuri said in dissatisfaction, "Dad, I don't want her to be my stepmother." In the room, the laughter of the father and daughter was full of pride. Amina stood outside the door, leaning against the wall, covering her mouth tightly, anger and pain in her eyes. She finally understood the truth of the matter. Her mother's inheritance did not disappear, but was occupied by the father and daughter. What made Amina even more angry was that her mother's death seemed to have some hidden connection with them. Amina remembers that after Fatima's death, Kwabena fired her medical team. Nia Kamara, who had been taking care of Fatima, also lost contact. Amina clenched her fists and swore to herself that she must uncover the truth behind this. The next morning, Amina realized that the father and daughter were planning some trick. Kwabena came to him early in the morning, crying with tears on his face, saying that ever since Fatima passed away, he had to play the roles of both father and mother, running the company and taking care of the family, and it was really hard for him. Amina found it irritating and interrupted him immediately, saying coldly, "Retire when you are tired. The small company left by my mother is just right for me to take over." Kwabena's face froze, but soon changed into another expression, tears streaming down her face uncontrollably. "I am too embarrassed to see Fatima. The company is losing so much money. Now, only you can save the company." Amina pretended to be surprised, but with a hint of mockery in her tone, she asked seriously, "Then what should I do?" Kwabena squeezed out a few tears, grabbed her hand, and said in a sad tone, "There is a big boss from Lagos who is willing to invest in us, but he has a condition. You have to marry him." Kwabena's rough palm rubbed Amina's delicate back of the hand. Amina suppressed her nausea, shook her head slightly, and said calmly, "If you want a marriage, wouldn't Zuri Kofi be more suitable? She is your biological daughter, and she is very sincere." Kwabena was a little embarrassed and coughed twice to cover it up. "Zuri has a bad temper, and I'm afraid of offending the big boss. Besides, I heard that the boss has so much assets," Kwabena said, holding up a finger. Amina raised her eyebrows and asked calmly, 10 million naira? Kwabena lowered his voice proudly. "It's 100 billion. Amina, such a good thing. Of course I will leave it to you. I have always treated you as my own daughter. You will enjoy happiness when you marry him." Amina gave a faint smile and nodded gently. "Okay, I'll marry you." But Amina's heart was as cold as ice. She needed time and opportunity to uncover the truth about her mother's death and to make the father and daughter pay for their actions. Just as he finished speaking, the sound of high heels hitting the floor was heard on the stairs, and Zuri Kofi, wearing a provocative suspender nightgown, slowly walked down the stairs, twisting her waist. Zuri's mouth was mocking, and her voice was lazy and vicious. "You don't know what's good for you. My dad said something nice to you, but you didn't listen? Otherwise, I'll find some street thugs to play with you for a night." Kwabena panicked and waved her hands quickly. "Zuri, don't talk nonsense. Amina has already agreed." "She has agreed." Amina was too lazy to pay attention to their clownish performance and added slowly, "However, I have one condition. My dowry will be determined by myself. If you don't agree, I won't meet the boss." Kwabena nodded repeatedly. "No problem, no problem." Zuri gritted her teeth and called out, "Dad." Kwabena pinched her secretly and lowered her voice to scold. "Shut up. She took away less money. Oluwazi and Adebayo can give 600 million, but he gave more." Amina pretended not to hear and let them do whatever they wanted, but she had already prepared herself mentally. When Kwabena saw that she agreed, he immediately became disgusted with the plain dress she was wearing and ordered Zuri to bring out his own revealing and cheap sexy clothes for Amina to change into. "Amina, make Oluwazi and fall in love at first sight." Kwabena gestured and drew a huge curve in the air. Amina's eyes turned cold and she laughed sarcastically. "Uncle, you have such a good vision. Be careful not to have nightmares at night." Kwabena was about to say something when he was hit by a door. His nose turned red and he screamed in pain in the corridor. Zuri, like nothing happened, picked up a few clothes and threw them into Amina's arms, saying lazily, "You're lucky. I heard that this old man won't live long. When he dies, all the money will be yours." Amina smiled coldly, threw the pieces of cloth-like clothes back into her arms, and said in a calm voice, "It's better for you to keep this blessing for yourself." Looking at those clothes, Amina almost doubted whether Kofi's family was so poor that they couldn't even afford to buy complete fabrics. Zuri handed over a champagne-colored miniskirt again. "This is a limited edition I just bought. It would be a waste to wear it on you." Amina raised her eyebrows and sneered in her heart. Did Zuri make a mistake? Although Fatima once complained that her ex-husband Oluwazi and Adebayo was too wasteful, could not save much money and lived in poverty, this does not mean that Amina really has nothing. In fact, her biological father, Oluwazi and Adebayo, would secretly ask a tailor to make high-end clothes for her every year, but he didn't dare let Fatima know. She was accompanied by father and daughter Amina Adebayo and Kwabena Kofi to a 5-star Michelin restaurant in the heart of Lagos for dinner. Amina looked down at her skirt, which was too short, and had to carefully hold the hem of her skirt as she walked, for fear of exposing herself if she was not careful. Zuri Kofi stood nearby, his face full of disdain, and muttered rudely, "Can you not be so embarrassing? Showing a little more will hook men." As Zuri spoke, she even deliberately pulled down the collar of her deep V shirt. Amina glanced at Zuri speechlessly and complained in her heart, "If you pull any further, I'm afraid even your belly button will be exposed." Suddenly, Kwabena Kofi jumped up from his chair, his face full of nervousness and flattery. "Get up. Oluwazi and Adebayo is here." Following his gaze, Amina subconsciously widened her eyes. Amina glanced at Zuri Kofi, and she also covered her mouth, exclaiming in disbelief, "Oh my God, so handsome. Dad, didn't you say he was an old man in his 50s? Kwabena's face froze, and he was obviously feeling a little upset. so he simply pretended not to hear. The legendary big boss walked over slowly, took off his sunglasses, smiled at them, and had a playful look in his eyes. Don't just stand there. Sit down. Why are you so nervous? Amina was speechless for a moment. Her mind went blank. How could this be a boss? It was clearly her handsome biological father, Amina Adebayo. What on earth did he want to do? Before Amina could recover from the shock, Zuri's eyes widened. He pushed Amina to the side without any hesitation, leaned forward slightly, the cleavage of his chest faintly visible, and gave Amina a smile that he thought was charming. Amina held her forehead silently, feeling powerless. Could it be that this woman was planning to replace me and fight in person? It's not surprising. Amina is very elegant and well-maintained. Time has hardly left any traces on his face. People would believe that he is in his 30s. How could a girl not be attracted to a boy like him? However, the next second, Amina suddenly closed his eyes and said in a cold voice as if he had been greatly insulted, "Where did this ugly thing come from? It's an eyesore. It seems that I can't take out the money." Kwabena's face suddenly changed. He quickly pulled Zuri back behind him and scolded her mercilessly. "Why don't you apologize to Amina? How shameless." Zuri twisted her waist in grievance and called out coquettishly, "Dad." Her voice was so thin and soft that it made people's scalps numb. As he spoke, Zuri winked at Amina in a pitiful manner. This wink scared Amina so much that he spit out a mouthful of water, which happened to spray on Zuri's face. Zuri was not annoyed at all. She even dipped her finger into the water droplets on her face, licked them tenderly, and blinked at Amina. "Water is sweet." Amina and Amina took a big step back at the same time, wishing to keep a distance of 1 kilometer from the greasy girl. But Amina lost her balance and bumped into the person behind her. A warm and strong hand supported Amina's waist. She subconsciously looked back and was met with a gentle and handsome smiling face. There seemed to be a pool of clear spring water hidden in the man's eyes, and his smile was as warm as the morning light at dawn. And it looked vaguely familiar. "Be careful," the man said softly, gently holding Amina steady, then turned around and walked to Amina naturally, smiled slightly, and called, "Dad." Amina's pupil shrank and her whole body froze. "Oh my God, my biological father has become someone else's father?" Amina gave Amina a meaningful look, patted the young man on the shoulder, and said with obvious mischief in his voice, "This is my son, Kwame Mensah, who came here specially to help me check and see my future stepmother." Amina understood instantly that Amina was about to start causing trouble. Amina wisely kept her mouth shut and watched quietly, not intending to expose the truth. However, Amina did not take any action, while someone else was ready to take action. When Zuri saw Kwame for the first time, he felt like he was electrocuted, and his Rin and Du meridians were instantly opened, and his eyes were shining with a fiery light. Although Amina Adebayo is handsome, he is old after all. Kwame is different. He is young and handsome, and has a bright future of inheriting a fortune of hundreds of billions. He is simply the Prince Charming in Zuri's dreams. Seeing Zuri about to pounce on him, Amina curled her lips slightly, as if she had seen through Amina's plan. This cruel old fox could even use his own son. In fact, Amina Adebayo had heard about Kwame Mensah a long time ago. After Fatima Dlamini passed away, Amina Adebayo called Amina and said, "Let Daddy take care of you from now on, but I have remarried and you now have a half-brother. Do you mind?" And this so-called brother is Kwame Mensah. Amina was sure that today was the first time she had seen Kwame Mensah in person. To be honest, this meeting was a little beyond Amina's expectations. She didn't expect the other party to be so handsome, which made her feel particularly complicated. If Kwame was uglier, maybe she would feel better. Could it be that her father also considers appearance when choosing stepsons? Not only does he have to choose a beautiful wife for his remarriage, but he also has to screen his child's face? Amina couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Just as Amina was lost in her thoughts, Kwame suddenly turned around and looked at her vaguely, as if he had heard her inner complaints. Amina frowned and bared her teeth at Kwame, feeling no good feelings towards the man who stole her father away. Kwame seemed to be startled by Amina, with his mouth open in astonishment, but soon he covered his mouth and shrugged his shoulders, obviously laughing. Upon seeing this, Amina immediately became furious and felt frustrated, thinking that she was being mercilessly mocked. Amina Adebayo also noticed this scene. He took Kwame's shoulder and said with an ambiguous smile, "By the way, my son is old enough to get married. Young people nowadays are unwilling to get married. I am very worried." When Zuri Kofi heard this, he immediately twisted left and right, trying to act reserved and sensible in front of Kwabena Kofi, trying hard to make a good impression. Finally, Zuri quietly reached out and poked Kwabena's waist and said through his teeth while laughing, "Dad, I'm still here." Kwabena Kofi then seemed to suddenly remember his daughter and looked very proud. Kwabena suggested with a smile, "Isn't that just perfect? Zuri, you don't have a boyfriend yet." Kwabena then frowned again, looking worried. She insists on waiting for her Mr. Right and doesn't even want to talk about love. It worries me to death. Zuri showed a shy look at the right time. Dad. Zuri raised her eyes slightly, glanced at Kwame, smiled slightly, pinched her throat and said shyly, but I seem to have found my true love. Kwame was obviously startled and seemed to subconsciously want to step back, but Oluwaseun Adebayo held his shoulder. Oluwaseun smiled like a fox and teased, "Why are you running? Miss Zuri has taken a fancy to you." Kwame kept a stiff smile and muttered to himself, "That's why you want to run away." Amina looked at Kwame's stiff and wry smile and couldn't help but burst out laughing. Oluwaseun suddenly proposed to talk to Amina alone in order to enhance the father-daughter relationship and generously let Kwame go out to accompany Zuri and his daughter. So, Zuri happily dragged Kwame away, looking like a little bird. Kwame looked at Oluwaseun in disbelief, with the word help almost written on his face. Oluwaseun just narrowed his eyes, waved and smiled like a fox, saying goodbye. Goodbye. Only the father and daughter were left in the room, and the atmosphere returned to its delicate and awkward state. Oluwaseun was as cheerful as ever, not serious at all. "What's wrong with my baby girl? You have a stern face. Are you unhappy to see your daddy?" Seeing Oluwaseun's carefree appearance, Amina suddenly understood why her mother decided to divorce. Oluwaseun is like a teenager who never grows up. He lives in his own world, always causing others to worry about him, but never knows how to be someone else's support. Amina couldn't help but ask the question that had been pent up in her heart for a long time. Why did mommy divorce you and marry Kwabena Kofi? In terms of qualifications, Kwabena is neither as rich as Oluwaseun, nor as handsome as him, and even his sense of humor is far behind him. But since her remarriage, Fatima has been smiling more often. Hearing this, the smile on Oluwaseun's face gradually disappeared and his expression became unusually serious. It was the first time Amina saw a father like this. She felt a little scared, but she became more determined to seek justice for her mother. Amina told Oluwaseun everything she had overheard. However, Oluwaseun laughed nonchalantly after hearing this. "That's just your guess. With the courage of the father and daughter, they want to kill for money? Don't be ridiculous." Amina was anxious. "Shouldn't you trust me and help me?" Oluwaseun said slowly. "Why should I help you? That woman abandoned me." Oluwaseun looked at Amina calmly, his tone cold. "I came here just to take you away. Now, it's your turn to make a choice. Choose dad or mom." Having said that, Oluwaseun returned to his nonchalant look, as if the heaviness just now was just an illusion. Amina stared at Oluwaseun's handsome face, as if she saw how easily he had captured people's hearts when he was young. "What if I choose my mother?" Amina asked in a low voice. "What else can I do?" Oluwaseun shrugged, looking nonchalant. "Dad is very sad, so I have no choice but to go back by myself." Oluwaseun smiled and sighed softly. "She's already dead, but I still let you fight for her like this. As a father, I have completely failed." Even if Amina Adebayo was slow, she could understand at this moment that Oluwaseun Adebayo had rejected her request. It seems that the resentment that Oluwaseun has towards Fatima Dlamini has not dissipated till now. An indescribable sadness surged in Amina's heart, and she suddenly felt as if she was the only one in the world who still remembered her mother's kindness. "If you don't help me, I'll do it myself." Amina gritted her teeth and made a vow to herself. Amina must make Kwabena Kofi and his daughter pay for what they have done. Hearing Amina's words, Oluwaseun Adebayo clapped his hands and showed an almost relieved smile. "That's more like it. You are my only daughter. How can you not have any means at all?" Just then, Amina saw Kwame Mensah returning with Kwabena Kofi and his daughter. Zuri Kofi clung to Kwame Mensah like a clingy pendant. Kwame didn't push him away, but he didn't really get close either. His expression was calm and decent, and he maintained a perfect sense of distance and politeness. Amina's heart moved, as if she suddenly understood her father's intention. Amina turned her head and smiled at Oluwaseun Adebayo. "Dad, do you like your new son?" Oluwaseun Adebayo smacked his lips and smiled as he replied, "Dad likes you the most. Look at your smile. It's so much like my smile when I was in my heyday." The huge rock that had been weighing on Amina's heart seemed to have finally fallen to the ground, and she felt a lot more relaxed. Amid the curious looks from the crowd, Amina walked straight to Kwame Mensah, raised her phone, and said with a smile, "Add me so we can keep in touch." Kwame raised an eyebrow slightly, took Amina's phone, and entered his number gently. Zuri Kofi, who was standing nearby, suddenly turned pale. His eyes looked as if he wanted to gouge Amina out, as if he was gritting his teeth and saying, "Why? I haven't even got his contact information yet." "That's it, Mr. Kwame. See you next time." Amina smiled and waved without even looking at Zuri. Kwabena Kofi and his daughter had no choice but to follow Amina's steps awkwardly, each with their own agenda. Along the way, Kwabena Kofi kept asking, What did you talk about with Mr. Aluwazian? Amina raised her chin and said proudly, he is very satisfied with me. As long as I nod, the marriage can be arranged at any time. Kwabena Kofi was visibly relieved, and the wrinkles on his face seemed to have smoothed out. Amina added slowly, Aluwazian also promised to invest in 100 billion in our company, but the condition is that I have to get 2% of the shares so that he can help us manage the company. In addition, Mr. Kwame also has a good impression of Zuri. Hearing this, Zuri Kofi snorted proudly. Of course, you should all thank me. If it weren't for me, our family wouldn't have such a great thing. Kwabena Kofi smiled and asked eagerly, the shares are easy to handle. Did Aluwazian say when to transfer the money? Amina said with embarrassment, Aluwazian means that we have to wait until we get the shares before transferring the money. Otherwise, it will be unreasonable and easy to be criticized. Kwabena Kofi patted Amina on the shoulder and said, don't worry, I'll go find a lawyer to handle the formalities right away. That night, Amina was looking up some information in her room when the door was suddenly pushed open. Amina closed her computer and looked at Zuri Kofi, who was walking in with big strides. She asked him as if she was used to it. What's the matter? Zuri spread out his hands confidently. Give me Kwame's contact information. Amina raised her eyes and asked with a half smile, you are in such a hurry to get married. Do you really want to be my daughter? You're talking bullshit. Zuri waved his diamond-covered fingers in frustration, almost scratching Amina's face. Zuri sneered. I advise you not to play tricks, or I will make you die more miserably than your vixen mother. Amina quietly pressed the recorder on the table and recorded everything. Zuri became more and more proud as she spoke. If my father hadn't been merciful and taken you in, you and your daughter would have been killed by your useless father. Amina's face changed slightly, and she stared at Zuri. What do you mean? Zuri chuckled smugly. You really don't know anything? Back then, it was your mom who used her own company to beg my dad to marry you. Otherwise, your own dad would have found you and tortured you to death. You should be grateful for our kindness. Don't be ungrateful. Amina felt a chill in her heart. Could it be that her mother's death was also related to Aluwazian Adebayo? But even so, Amina still prefers to believe Aluwazian Adebayo. Zuri put her hands on her hips and warned proudly, remember, when I marry Mr. Kwame and inherit all the property of the Adebayo family, you will have to depend on me if you want to survive. Amina stared at Zuri quietly, sneering in her heart. She felt that the person in front of her was so ridiculous that it made her feel pity. Amina lowered her head, pretended to be weak, and handed over Kwame Mintz's contact information in her mobile phone. Before leaving, Amina said calmly, Kwame even asked me what you like. Really? Zuri danced with joy and ran out with her phone in her arms. Well, if you want to know what I like, why don't you just ask me? Watching Zuri's figure going away, Amina curled her lips slightly. Kwame Mintza never asked her anything. Moreover, Amina also firmly believed that Aluwazian would not bring such a person to her for no reason, and his appearance must have other meanings. Sure enough, I received a text message from Kwame on my phone. The content was simple but meaningful. I know who you are, so, Miss Amina, do you want to bribe me? Of course. Otherwise, did Amina add his contact information just to make friends online? Zuri keeps calling Amina's mother a vixen, so she'll let this self-righteous woman experience the feeling of being crushed by a vixen. Amina Adebayo heard about the two of them starting dating. The source of the news was naturally Zuri Kofi's mouth that was about to turn up to the sky. Zuri proudly showed off in front of Amina, telling Kwabena Kofi how great she was that she could make Kwame Mintza fall in love with her. Kwabena also became beaming with joy, as if he had already seen the future wealth and glory that was within his grasp. Kwabena deliberately spread the news of Amina and Kwame's upcoming marriage, which immediately attracted countless cooperation. Recently, he has been counting money so much that his hands are tired. However, these small profits are just a drop in the bucket compared to the 100 billion investment that Aluwazian Adebayo originally promised to Kwabena. Kwabena knew clearly that he had no real capital and all his dreams were riding on the illusory 100 billion. Hey, Amina, persuade Aluwazian to transfer the funds quickly, so that your marriage will be smoother. Kwabena tried to please him carefully, and said tentatively, Uncle will be your family from now on. If you have any grievances, you have to go back to your family. Amina smiled and nodded in agreement. Okay, but Aluwazian is on a business trip now. We have to wait for him to come back. I still have some savings here. I will invest it in the company first. After all, I am also a shareholder. Kwabena's eyes lit up when he heard this, and he quickly asked, Where did you get the money? Amina replied calmly, Aluwazian gave me pocket money, quite a bit. Hearing this, Kwabena finally breathed a sigh of relief and completely believed that Amina was determined to follow them. Amina asked humbly, But my little money is far from the initial investment. Uncle, what should I do? Kwabena hesitated for a moment, feeling torn between conscience and desire, but finally gritted his teeth and said, "Don't worry, Uncle still has some money. We can hold on for a while." Amina sneered in her heart, having expected this to happen. He was greedy and would sooner or later fall into the trap he had set. In fact, Amina had no intention of actually getting married, and the so-called 100 billion investment was a scam from beginning to end. All this was planned by Amina and Amina Adebayo just to lure Kwabena into the trap. As the collaborations were progressing one after another, Kwabena couldn't wait for the non-existent 100 billion yuan, so he could only invest all his savings into it. Zuri is obsessed with her dream of becoming the mistress of the Adebayo family, while Kwabena fantasizes about starting a business empire. The two are immersed in their own illusions and would never listen to any advice. While the dream was still shattered, Amina cleared out all her and her mother Fatima Dlamini's belongings from Kwabena's house, claiming that she would move out and live together after marriage. At this point, Amina and her mother have completely severed their ties with this family both legally and factually. Amina was the only one left, still staying here, watching coldly as this farce was about to completely collapse. That day, Kwabena came to see Amina in a hurry. Amina, who had just walked out of the Lagos Central Hospital, looked pale. Amina investigated her mother's medical records, but was unable to find the medical team. She even got worse news. Nia Kamara, the only person she could testify against, had passed away. At this point, the truth about Fatima's death has lost its last witness. At this moment, the phone rang suddenly. It was Kwabena calling. His voice was filled with anxiety that he could not hide. "Amina, did Al-Yawazian say when to transfer the money?" Amina held the phone in her hand, smiled coldly, and thought to herself, "He doesn't even have basic IQ, and yet he dares to play the money game. Uncle, Al-Yawazian hasn't returned yet. I can't contact him now," Amina said calmly while looking at the dark sky. Kwabena on the other end of the phone was almost going crazy, his voice trembling as he said he was in urgent need of funds. The cooperation has already started with huge initial investment, but Kwabena's capital chain has been broken. Seeing that the company is about to collapse, how can he not go crazy? Amina stood at the hospital entrance, facing the wind, and spoke expressionlessly, but in a warm and comforting tone. "Uncle, I know someone who can lend us money. He is my mother's old friend. As long as Al-Yawazian comes back, we can pay it back." Kwabena heard this, as if grasping the last straw, and urged impatiently, "Introduce it to me quickly." Amina took advantage of the situation and introduced a loan shark to Kwabena. Kwabena was already consumed by panic. As long as he could get the money, he didn't care about the consequences. But Amina just couldn't feel happy in her heart. Leaving Kwabena bankrupt and in debt was just a small punishment. Amina knew that the real revenge was far from being settled financially. Because Kwabena not only seeks money, but also kills people. Amina gradually calmed down and stood outside the hospital, with a look of determination in her eyes. Amina picked up her phone and sent a message to Kwame Mensah. "Let's trade." "Soon," Kwame replied. Ms. Amina really loves to joke. Amina looked at the screen, curled the corners of her lips slightly, put the phone back, her eyes cold and firm. Kwabena Kofi owed a large sum of money to a loan shark, and when he could not pay it back, he quietly went into hiding, leaving Amina Adebayo and Zuri Kofi alone in the house. Soon, several debt collectors came to the door angrily and started smashing things in the house, creating a chaotic scene. Amina pretended to be very scared and quickly hid behind Zuri, even secretly pinching her waist to prevent her from escaping. Zuri gritted her teeth, still showing off her superiority, and said to the debt collectors, "I'm going to marry into the Adebayo family and become a young lady. You better not offend me." However, the debt collector didn't buy it at all and smashed the glass coffee table in front of her, sending glass shards flying everywhere. Zuri was so scared that she couldn't help but scream and her face turned pale. Amina took the opportunity to wipe a handful of hidden onion water on the corners of her eyes. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she sobbed, "Zuri, call Kwame Mensah and ask him to come and save us." Zuri nodded while crying, her makeup already smudged, and she frantically took out her cell phone to call Kwame Mensah. Not long after, Kwame arrived at the scene with several lawyers and forcibly asked the arrogant debt collectors to leave the apartment. Zuri seemed to have finally found a supporter and threw herself into Kwame's arms, crying loudly, almost exhausted. Kwame patted Zuri's back gently and said, "Ms. Zuri, I can help you. As long as you can take out something as collateral, I can help you get a large loan from the bank." Hearing this, Zuri's eyes suddenly lit up, and she asked between sobs, "Is it really possible? But I only have 2 companies that are barely operating. Is this okay?" Little did Zuri know that the 2 so-called shell companies were actually the inheritance left by Fatima Dlamini to Amina, but they had already been taken over by Zuri. Kwame had a meaningful smile on his face, gentle yet seductive. "Of course, just give them to me." Zuri was completely caught off guard and signed her name on the contract Kwame handed to her without hesitation in front of Amina. Zuri didn't realize that this was not a mortgage agreement, but a formal asset transfer contract. The legacy left by Fatima Dlamini is finally returning to Amina. Before leaving, Kwame looked at Amina and said with a smile, "Dad asked me to tell you that 100 billion has been deposited into your account." Zuri panicked and asked anxiously, "Why call her? Shouldn't the money be directly transferred to the company's account?" Kwame shrugged innocently, "I don't know about that. I have to rush to the bank to deal with the follow-up." As soon as he finished speaking, he strode away, leaving Zuri with a panicked look on her face. Zuri saw that the situation was not going well and immediately started to act unreasonably, yelling at Amina, "Give me the money." Amina wiped the tears from her face, raised her eyebrows, and smiled coldly, "That's my money. I won't give you a penny." "You." Zuri's face turned red with anger, like a puffer fish with its fur standing on end. But soon, Zuri suppressed her anger and showed a smug smile, as if she was sure of victory. "It doesn't matter, as long as I marry Kwame Mensah, with or without you. Everything in the Adebayo family will be mine sooner or later." After that, Zuri smiled and dialed the phone back to her room, saying in a sweet voice, "Dad, I have good news for you." Watching Zuri's back gradually going away, Amina sat in the messy living room, slowly grasping the clothes around her chest. She silently told herself to stay calm. That night, Kwabena Kofi indeed returned, his face full of false concern and his attitude was uncharacteristic. Even Zuri became extra attentive, holding a glass of water and handing it to Amina with a smile. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have offended you." Amina acted innocent and put on a smug smile, making them think that she had completely let her guard down. "I'm a little tired and want to go to sleep first." Amina said to Kwabena with a smile, "Uncle, don't worry, I have a share in the company. I won't sit idly by and watch." Kwabena nodded hurriedly and replied perfunctorily, Okay. At that moment, Amina had already understood in her heart. She had given them the last chance, but they were the ones who insisted on their own way and refused to repent. In the dead of night, Amina's door was gently pushed open. Kwabena Kofi and Zuri Kofi tiptoed in, their movements cautious but malicious. Zuri followed behind, mocking in a low voice, "Don't worry, I put sleeping pills in the water she drank a long time ago, so she won't wake up even if there's thunder today." Kwabena frowned, still worriedly whispering, "Be careful." Kwabena pulled out a syringe, expertly grasped Amina's arm, and began injecting the solution. Zuri asked curiously, "Is this thing really useful?" Kwabena smiled sinisterly. "You've seen how her mother died. They used the same medicine as last time, 1 milliliter a day. After 7 days, she had heart failure. It looked like a sudden natural death. Even the autopsy couldn't find any cause." Zuri chuckled, her voice full of malice. "We are her only relatives anyway. Who will dare to perform an autopsy on her? If she dies, her money will be mine." Amina closed her eyes and continued to pretend to be asleep, her breathing steady and orderly. In the corner of the room, a hidden pinhole camera had already quietly recorded their every move and broadcast it live on the internet. On the other side of the screen, countless netizens witnessed it all. "I didn't expect to encounter such a horrifying thing while watching a live broadcast. Oh my God, does anyone know this girl? Please save her. Call the police. I hope they arrive soon." Amina calmed down. From now on, Kwabena and Zuri were on a path of no return. Kwame arrived with the police. He kicked the door open and ran into Kwabena Kofi and Zuri Kofi, father and daughter, who were trying to flee in panic. Zuri Kofi was stunned and shouted hurriedly, "Kwame, what are you doing?" But Kwame ignored her and rushed to the bedside, picked up the weak Amina Adebayo, and rushed out without hesitation. Zuri Kofi tried to catch up, but was sternly stopped by the police at the door and could do nothing but stomp his feet on the spot. Amid the hurried footsteps, Kwame anxiously looked down at Amina and patted her cheek hard. "Amina, wake up, wake up." Amina slowly opened her eyes, a weak but stubborn smile appeared on her lips. "Did I scare you?" Kwame's eyes instantly turned red, and he suddenly covered his eyes, as if to hide the emotions that were about to surge. After a moment of silence, Kwame said in a hoarse voice, "You are really crazy. Have you ever thought about what if they gave too much medicine? What if I am too late?" Amina shook her head slightly, with a firm look in her eyes. "No, I have already secretly replaced the potion." Kwame gritted his teeth, his eyes full of helplessness. "No, I'm not wrong. You are a complete lunatic." Although she was not injected with any truly harmful drugs, Amina was still sent to the hospital, and she announced that she was seriously ill. She wants to do things to the extreme. She wants everyone to see her own vulnerability and to expose the evil deeds of Kwabena Kofi and his daughter in broad daylight. Amina was lying on the hospital bed, watching the news report about the father and daughter being formally arrested by the police, and she felt relieved. Not only that, the police also dug out more clues from their confessions. They had also been investigated for conspiracy to harm her mother Fatima Dlamini. This father and daughter finally couldn't escape anymore. Just then, Oluwaseyi and Adebayo arrived at the hospital. Kwame seemed to have deliberately, accidentally leaked the news of Amina's hospitalization, allowing him to learn the truth. As soon as Oluwaseyi and Adebayo entered the ward, he was so angry that his face turned blue. He strode to the bedside and cursed, "Are you crazy? How dare you be so proud? Are you fucking mentally ill?" Amina gritted her teeth and retorted, "I didn't." Oluwaseyi was furious. "You could have kept them as evidence, but you had to broadcast them live. Can't you even bear it for a moment?" Amina endured the sourness in her nose, turned her head away, and said in a trembling voice, I can wait, but my mother can't wait." The tears in her eyes finally burst out and fell uncontrollably. When Kwabena and his daughter attacked her, she felt a sense of relief and resolution she had never felt before. She finally didn't have to endure it any longer. However, Oluwaseyi's anger was like a hammer that hit her heart hard. The next second, Oluwaseyi suddenly leaned over and hugged her tightly in his arms. "You only want your mom and not your dad?" he asked in a low voice. "If something really happens to you, what will your dad do? Your dad hasn't taken you home yet." Amina was stunned. Her nose felt completely sore. She hugged his hands tighter, and tears flowed out uncontrollably. In her father's warm embrace, she could no longer hold on and burst into tears. Outside the door, Kwame stood silently for a while, then closed the door quietly, silently leaving the space for the father and daughter. If possible, Amina only hopes that her parents can be healthy and love each other. As time passed, the trial finally came to an end. Kwabena Kofi and his daughter were sentenced to life imprisonment for attempted murder and economic fraud, while Zuri Kofi, as an accomplice, was sentenced to 15 years in prison. This is the result that Amina's specially hired lawyer has fought for them. The death penalty was too lenient for them. Amina wanted them to suffer slowly in prison to atone for Fatima's sins throughout their lives. Moreover, Amina had already arranged that the loan sharks that Kwabena owed money to also had power in prison. "I heard that those people will not let him go easily. They will cut out his heart and liver one by one and make him pay with his flesh and blood." As for Zuri, her beautiful face, which she was most proud of, was destined to be lost. When Amina saw Zuri for the last time, he was still staring at her, shouting with crazy obsession, "Kwame will come to save me. I won't stay here forever." Amina just smiled coldly and spoke slowly. "Ms. Zuri, have you forgotten? Your Kwame actually has nothing to do with anything in the Adebayo family. The person Kwame cares about is Nia Kamara, who was killed by you." Zuri froze, as if struck by lightning. Zuri finally recalled that it was Nia Kamara, who had been silently taking care of Amina's mother, who was forced into a mental hospital and left her to die naturally there. And Kwame is Nia Kamara's biological son. They look so much alike, but no one can tell. Amina looked at her stiff appearance and finally uttered the last words, "You'd better not donate your brain. Goodbye." Behind me, Zuri cried hysterically and was forcibly subdued by the prison guards on the ground. Her shrill screams filled my ears. It is said that in prison, Zuri was arrogant at first and ordered his roommates to serve him in a domineering manner. But that was not the place for Zuri to run wild. The prisoners pushed her into a dirty toilet and served her well. Someone grabbed Zuri's smooth and delicate skin and started to pinch her all over, leaving her with bruises all over. Zuri fought back desperately, but her front teeth were knocked out. She could only stay in a corner, muttering madly that she was the young lady of the Adebayo family and was crazy and stupid all day long. However, all this had nothing to do with Amina. She wiped away her tears, put on her clothes, walked out of the hospital, and prepared to go to the appointment. Amina came over, with a smile on her face, and asked, "Sorry to have kept you waiting." Kwame Mensah said, showing his typical gentleman smile, "When waiting for a beautiful woman, no amount of time is too long." Amina sighed softly and looked at him teasingly. "Wow, Kwame, you really learned 99% of your oily way from my dad." Kwame replied in mock seriousness, "Uncle Oluwaseyi is so charming." The two smiled at each other, with a hint of helplessness and relief in their eyes. Amina raised her eyebrows and asked half-jokingly, "Aren't you curious about how long they were sentenced to?" Kwame shook his head, his eyes calm and firm. "I don't care at all. Those things have nothing to do with me anymore. I came to you today to tell you something, which is related to Uncle Oluwaseyi." Amina's heart moved slightly, and she quickly asked, "Is it about my dad?" Kwame nodded and lowered his voice a little. Back then, all these plans were actually proposed by Uncle Oluwaseyi himself. He found out some secrets behind Fatima Dlamini's death, and then found me, hoping that I could help you complete your revenge. He gave the decision to you because he said that he couldn't protect you forever, and one day you would have to grow up on your own. Hearing this, Amina fell silent, with an indescribable emotion rising in her heart. She smiled slightly and said softly, "That's really what he would do. But, to be honest, he didn't find out about it." You asked him to find out, right? Kwame smiled faintly and said without denying, yes. My mother left some clues that proved that Fatima Dlamini's death was not an accident. I just handed them to Uncle Aluazian, and through him, I completed the counterattack against Kwabena Kofi and his daughter. Amina listened with no resentment in her heart, only a deeper understanding. She knew it was time to go home. She had never wanted to see Aluazian Adebayo so badly, because he was her last relative in this world. She turned to leave when she heard Kwame's voice behind her. Amina, can we meet again? She didn't look back, but answered silently in her heart, if it's fate. It was late at night, and Amina almost ran back to the old but warm apartment. As soon as she entered the door, she gave Aluazian Adebayo a big hug. Aluazian Adebayo smiled and patted her on the back, his eyes full of pride and satisfaction. It seems that you already know everything. How did Dad arrange it? Is it perfect? Amina leaned in his arms, feeling the long-lost sense of security, and smiled softly as she praised, great. Aluazian Adebayo grinned smugly, rolled his eyes, and asked casually, so what do you think of this Kwame Mensah guy? Amina was stunned and cried out in a helpless tone, Dad. Aluazian Adebayo acted coquettishly with an innocent face. It's because you refused to go on a blind date that Dad racked his brains to come up with this solution. My precious daughter, who is as beautiful as a flower, must find a top-notch one to match her. In order to find such a handsome guy, Dad put a lot of thought. Amina shook her head and couldn't help laughing. She knew very well that she was no match for the old fox. But she thought of her own parents, Fatima Dlamini and Aluazian Adebayo, who loved each other so much, but became strangers in the end. Her mother even chose to remarry to stay away from her father. Feelings welled up in her heart. She sighed softly. Forget it, Dad. A wise man does not fall in love. Aluazian Adebayo laughed and patted her on the back, saying with a look of satisfaction, Ha! Good girl, just like your dad. Enjoy the present moment.